I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for stopping by. At the Bold Business Podcast, we are normalizing important conversations. Yes, there are tips. Yes, there are ways to solve problems. More importantly, are going to be, what do you need for yourself to be able to solve those problems and make the most of the education, the training, and the programs that you are already using. This is a supplement to that. It can sit on top of it, fuel your soul, fuel your mind, and most importantly, regardless of where you're at on your journey. Maybe you're starting out. Maybe you're ready to scale. Maybe you're going through reinvention. The conversations we are having will help you at each of those stages. So hang around, see what's going on, and I look forward to seeing you engaging with our videos. I am excited to introduce you to David C Barnett. David's been working with small businesses for over 20 years. Not only has he helped them grow, he's helped entrepreneurs buy and sell them too. He's also helped on the financing side to make those deals possible. Not only is he the author of 7 books about business transactions and local investing, he's also the host of a YouTube channel, which I personally like and watch and listen to, with hundreds of videos about buying, selling, and financing, as well as managing small and medium enterprises. We go into a lot of depth in this conversation, and let me just tell you, I'm going to call out 3 things that you will hear and take away. The first is the real reasons you'll sell your business, and as a potential buyer of a business, the real reasons that business may be for sale. The second thing we're going to talk about is being real. What is the raw truth about your business? And an exercise that you can go through to evaluate yourself and your business to understand exactly what you have, to make strategic decisions right now, also to design a business that you may choose to exit later. And lastly, but not leastly, is to face what you fear. What does that actually mean? How does that work in our business capacity? And when we know ourselves first, much more is possible because we set the stage for the design and the steps and the actions and the products and the services that we are offering.
Because what does the buyer of your business want? Most people will just say they want to buy a business. That's not what they want. What they want is to acquire a cash flow to support themselves and their family.
Wow! You are listening to the Bold Business Podcast, where you will hear firsthand experiences about what it really takes to ensure market relevance and your company's future.
Let's start with the stat. How many businesses that want to sell actually do, David?
It's hard to tell because there are no good statistics at all out there. In fact, even the government doesn't know how many businesses are sold. And I'll tell you why. A lot of small businesses are sold in what we call an asset sale. And so the buyer ends up creating a new entity, for example, a new LLC to be the buyer in the transaction. But a lot of the times when businesses are sold, not all of the money crosses the table on closing day. Sometimes there's a seller financing component, which means the seller, who is the legal entity of the seller, the owner, it may have to continue to stay open for a couple of years while it collects some of these payments. And so over at the government, Department of State, for example, depends where you are, which country you are, what they're going to do is they're going to record the buyer's new LLC being formed. They're actually going to say it's a business startup, even though it really isn't. It's actually going to have something to do with the business being sold. But then later, years later, when the seller maybe winds up their legal entity, corporation, or whatever it is, then the government might record that as a business closure. And so even the government doesn't quite know. And when there's a stock sale, there's a change of directors and things like that go on. But again, there's all kinds of reasons why directors of corporations might change. So again, there's no real clear-cut statistics. And then you have to decide which transactions are we going to count? If some people bring on a new partner, are we going to count that as a purchase? If there's 3 partners and they decide to buy out one of their partner, are we going to count that as a sale? Are we going to count if we're talking about a family succession where parents sell a business to their child, for example? So it's tough to know, but here are some things that are more generally agreed upon in the broader business for sale community, is that probably 80% of businesses that do change hands do so without any kind of intermediary. So that means if you're looking at business for sale websites or talking to business brokers, you're not accessing the majority of the market. You're just talking to people who've decided to go down that route to sell a business. And we also know from statistics published by some of those big business for sale websites that almost 80% of the businesses that get advertised for sale there don't sell. But again, not everything advertised for sale there is really a business. Sometimes people close a business and they still put an ad up saying, I've got all this machinery and equipment for you to do this kind of business, and it's for sale as a package. Or some people might put up a listing for a franchise opportunity available in a certain city. Some of their statistics even can be a little bit off. It's hard to tell. And it just has to do with the private nature of small business. These are all privately controlled entities. And so there's a real opacity in the marketplace, opacity being the opposite of transparency. So there's a lot of stuff going on that isn't clearly visible to all the people that are involved in the market, whether they're intermediaries, consultants, buyers, or sellers. And so it makes it interesting because different things can happen in different parts of the market that may or may not become news or be made aware of to people in other places in the market. And it means that for those who are willing to roll up their sleeves and do a bit of work and actually go looking for deals, that they can actually come across some good deals. Unlike a market that's more transparent, like houses, like houses in a given city, almost all of them are going to be reported to the MLS system, and it's very easy to see the data on how things are changing over the course of time. And so that I think would be a sort of an example of the other end of what things can be like.
It was interesting because I've been watching your YouTube channel for a while and you have a lot of information and you actually work really hard to make it less opaque and way more transparent. Was there something that allowed you to say, this is really necessary and here's why I want to do this?
Yeah,
Yeah?
there were a couple of aha moments when I first got started making YouTube videos about buying and selling businesses. I started to get emails from people who would say things like this. They would say, Hi, Dave, I really enjoy your YouTube videos, although I wish I had found you 2 years earlier because me and my wife put all of our life savings into this deal, which turned out to be a bad deal. And if we had known what you are teaching, we would never have done that. We wouldn't have lost our life savings. And then I was like, oh my God, there are people that are quite literally making bad mistakes when it comes to small business deals because of ignorance and just not knowing information. And if I create the information and put it out there, it's not going to reach everyone who needs it, I know, but at least if it's there, there's an opportunity for people to find it. So that's what kind of gave me my mission and my impetus was to, and even today, the company values that we have, our mission is to help people avoid bad deals. And that is not a statement specifically about buyers because sellers equally fall victim to this idea of bad deals in a different way that we can get into if you want.
You know what? I think we should because when I look at a transaction personally, so this is actually good to point out because I would have glossed right over that everybody knows that. No, we got to say some of those things out loud. So thanks for that, David, because a deal can fall apart for any myriad of reasons. And it could be a buyer, it could be a seller, it could be something totally external that cascades right into it. And so, yeah, let's go down that path.
First, let's get a couple of things on the table. Number one, small businesses sell for very low multiples of cash flow. So typically you're talking like high ones, like 1.7 to the mid to high twos, maybe, of what we call seller's discretionary cash flow, which is the total amount of money available to an owner operator that works full time. You might say, hey, 2 times cash flow sounds like a really good deal. A business produces $100,000 of cash flow. I can buy that for $200,000. But it's the amount of money available to an owner operator that works full time. So in addition to paying $200,000, you also have to work 40 hours a week. And so if you realize that your labor is a part of that, you realize, okay, it's actually quite a bit more than what you might see at the first glance. Okay. But this is the fundamental basis that has been arrived at over the course of the last 40 years about how we value these businesses. And there's a few reasons for that. But so there's not a lot of benefit in selling a small business if you think about it in this way. Like small business owners do not sell to quote unquote cash out in the way that Mark Zuckerberg sells some of his Facebook stock to cash out, right? And when do small businesses go up for sale? They go up for sale when there's some kind of pressing personal concern on the part of the owner that forces them to want to do something or need to do something different in their life. Because otherwise they would just keep the business. A good, profitable, successful business, you would just keep that. It makes every bit of financial sense not to sell. So what are those reasons people sell a business? There's 5 big reasons. I put the first reasons into one bucket together. I call them the mental basket: burnout, boredom, and fatigue. So you become exhausted, you become frustrated, you lost your joie de vivre about the business. It just gives you anxiety and worry and stuff like that. So that's one reason people will put up a business for sale. Then there's divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and retirement. So if you think about those things, the only one of those 5 things people plan for is retirement. All those other things are things that come up in life because we're human beings and these things happen to us, right? And so when one of those things happens and someone realizes, gee, I really can't continue to run my business anymore because of this new circumstance in my life, I need to sell it. If that person is not properly calibrated in their thinking as to what their business is truly worth and what someone can pay for it, what can happen is somebody will decide, okay, so let's say they have a $200,000 discretionary cash flow and they meet the wrong business broker or they talk to the wrong advisor who says to them, oh, you got $1 million business there. So then they go and they put their business up for sale for $1 million. And based on what you and I just talked about, that might be a $400,000 to $500,000 business. That person, though, now believes it's $1 million business because they've gotten advice from someone they looked up to or trusted, and they now put the business up for sale. And it sits on the market, and different people come to look at it, and maybe some people make offers. Maybe someone even makes $1 million offer. But by the time that person brings that offer to their lender, is going to sit down and show them how it just doesn't cash flow, and the deal is going to fall apart. And so that person is suffering from burnout, boredom, and fatigue, or they've been told they're getting a divorce, or they've been told by their doctor they have limited time, or they know that they need to move, for example, because their spouse got transferred or something like that. So one of these pressures is being applied to them, and they have a completely off base conception of what their business is worth. And what ends up happening is they end up spending a lot of time trying to sell the business. And while they're working on trying to sell the business, they lose the focus on the operational side. And what will start to happen is sales start to turn down, earnings start to turn down, and the value actually starts to decline while they're looking for that unrealistically high price. And these are some of the businesses that never change hands. Because what will eventually happen is that personal stressor that's applying itself to the owner will eventually cause the business to close. And the reason why I say this is a bad deal for a seller is because if they had their expectations properly calibrated in the beginning, and that person had been told your business is worth between $400,000 and $500,000, and they meet that buyer who gives them a reasonable offer, they could have been out of there in 3 or 4 months, right? And they would have preserved value. Employees would have preserved their job. Customers would have been able to carry on dealing with that company. It would have been easier for everyone, but it's the setting of the expectation that is the critical factor that has to be done up front.
My side is, how do you make a business grow that's thriving so that the 3 things that you talk about, the burnout, the fatigue, and I don't remember the third one because I'm now saying them out loud.
Boredom.
Thank you, boredom. Oh, wait,
Yeah.
no, I'm never bored. What's that? I'm just kidding. Totally. The 3 reasons that people decide they want to sell, it's their business wasn't designed to actually have a good understanding from them, and then they go and they make this unfortunate jump. Is that something that you're talking about in your YouTube channel? Is it just, here's the expectation of what to get and how to have a good conversation? Or are you also trying to help people that are like, I think I want to sell, so you got to put some design work into it? You're talking about that too, aren't you?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, you're familiar with that Michael Gerber book, E-Myth Revisited?
Love
S-
E-Myth.
So I really got into this space between '08 and 2011 when I ran a business brokerage office. And over those 3.5 years, I sold 35 companies for other people. And that's where my brokerage experience came from. Later, I evolved into working with buyers and sellers as a consultant. So I'm still working on deals, just in a different kind of business model. But I would run into business owners and they would be operating their business from what I describe as big bird's nest. And so if you can imagine an office or a cubicle completely surrounded with little yellow sticky notes with little reminders and notes and important numbers jotted down that have to be passed on to the accountant or something like that, right? I would meet these people and
Yes.
they would have all this stuff going on around them and they'd be
Yes.
working 50 hours a week and they never
Oh.
taken a vacation. And they would tell me, I need to sell my business because I'm burned out. And I would say to them, like, I can't bring anyone here to see how you live and expect them to pay money to step into your
I
shoes.
know exactly. That's true.
Like,
It's true.
for a while, I actually tried buying copies of E-Myth to give them to these people. And of course, they would never read them.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for the book. And it goes into the pile with the sticky notes.
And so eventually I started to work a little bit with these people. And one of the programs I have is called Build a Business That People Will Want to Buy. And it's a step-by-step how you organize a business more clearly and create an org chart and all that kind of stuff. But I do not coach people toward an exit. That's not part of my practice. And really, when people come to me and they say, I want to build this so that it becomes something that is more sellable, I'll point them to that program. But if they want to work with someone hand in hand, I'll say what you need to find is some kind of business coach that can help you with your systems and processes and all that kind of stuff.
Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. I thrive on your feedback and engagement. You're listening to the Bold Business Podcast, and I'm your host, Jess Dewell. This is your program for strategizing long-term success while diving deep into what the right work is for your business right now.
If you are ready to make a real impact in your business and you've waited too long to take action, go to reddirection.com and click on Solutions to find out how.
And like you, I have done deals. I've been part of deals, but unlike you, I'm on the other side of that if that's really what you want to do, you can have fun with that. Let me help you get ready and I can talk to you. You're going to go see David, right? For example, it's a huge opportunity to really stay in a lane that is supportive and can help the person with the business be real about it. And that's what it is. And I'm thinking about this concept of being real. And we've talking about secret erosions. We've touched on some ways that deals might, without going into a lot of depth, deals might fall apart and it can come from anywhere. And so I really want to spend a little bit of time and talk about the erosion piece, because I don't think people understand that. And when you said it, it's not only is it worth repeating, it's worth going into depth to just a little bit of, hey, somebody needs to understand what they're buying from you. And when you can't say it clearly, when you don't know, or when you look at yourself and you're burned out, somebody else is going to end up in the exact same place if they just step into your shoes, as a phrase that you used.
Yeah. So I think one of the things to think about is that in any small organization, so if you've only got 20 people or fewer in an organization, the corporate culture is entirely driven by the owner, who's an owner operator, right? That person being in the middle of everything, the way they act, the way they behave, the way they stop and say no to something that they might feel is not an ethical way to operate or anything like that. That's all going to be observed by the employees. That's going to set the tone of the way we do business here. And so if the attitude of the owner is an energetic one and we're going to serve customers, we're going to aggressively chase business, we're going to bring in new sales, et cetera, et cetera. And if that email comes in after hours, I'm going to reply to it because I'm eager to bring business into my company. That kind of behavior is going to be infectious and people are going to observe it. When your attitude as an owner changes and closing time hits and you start to act like a government employee or something, you're like, oh, 5 o'clock, out of here, log out of my email, I'm done. What's going to happen is your behavior and attitude towards a business is again going to infiltrate and trickle down through the other employees, and your other employees interact with customers and suppliers. And so that attitude is going to filter through. All you have to do is go into a business, like for example, a business where there's a public space, like think about a restaurant. You got a dining room, you got bathrooms, there's places where the public is functioning in that business. And so you get in there and there's a light bulb burned out, or there's like something is obviously in disrepair, or someone put a cardboard box that has something in it in the corner. They set it there out of the way, but you can see it and it looks unsightly, and no one's taken the time to go and remove that or hide it or put it in a closet, right? And an owner who's got a real keen interest in creating the best possible experience for guests isn't going to tolerate that. But somebody who's just going through the motions, not really too excited, they're going to gloss over those things. And the thing is, it's going to have an impact on the clientele. So I drove by a restaurant yesterday that had a broken window that the owner has fixed up with duct tape. So now it looks like a Halloween decoration. Like it looks like a spider web decoration on the window. And I looked at that and I was like, oh my God, it's probably $500 to call and get the glazier to come out and measure it up and fix it up
Yeah.
and do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's been like that for weeks. So that it either tells me the business is just marginal, right? Or it tells me the owner doesn't care. Either one of those things is a reason not to eat there.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a direct example of what I'm talking about, how the owner's position or attitude is actually creating a negative impact on the business. They may not even be aware, but they could be doing more if they just. Here's one of the biggest things that I find that sellers have an issue with is empathy. So just understanding the point of view of the buyer. And most business owners that are successful have a high degree of empathy with the customers they serve. Jess, when you're thinking about an offer or a program or something you're going to do with your customers, you probably sit there and think, okay, what does the customer want? What do they need? What do I think they're going to benefit from this? What is the likely value? So how do I price it so it represents a good value? Like you're actively thinking about the person on the other side of the table and what they want from you as a service provider. And business owners do this all the time. I find that when it comes to someone selling their business, they somehow detach themselves from the fact that they're still selling something. It's just that instead of a bit of inventory that something you would see on a shelf, it's now the business, which is the inventory, the object being sold. And I ran into this in a big way in one case that I'll share. It was a business owner who had a small little cafe in an office building. And so the hours were great from a business owner's point of view because they were only open when the offices were open. And so they were busy at coffee break and they were busy at lunchtime and a little bit in the afternoon. And they would wind things up just after 5. And I took a look at her business. I looked at her numbers and I said, I think this is a totally sellable business. It's got a lot of attractive features, especially the hours. And based on your earnings, I think I could probably sell it for about 65 grand. And she looked at me and she said, oh no, that's not enough. I need over 100. And I said, if you want to sell this business for over $100,000, you only have to do one small change. You just have to implement a 2-drink minimum policy. So anyone who comes to the front counter has to order 2 cups of coffee. You won't serve anyone that wants 1 cup. And because you need to double your sales. And she said, that's not going to work. Most people don't want 2 cups. And then I just asked her, I said, so you're saying that what your customers want is important in this? And that's when she got it. That's when she was like, oh, because what does the buyer of your business want? Most people will just say they want to buy a business. That's not what they want. What they want is to acquire a cash flow to support themselves and their family. For most small businesses that are going to be owner-run businesses, they're looking to acquire a cash flow. And they're going to be putting their full-time labor into it. So part of that cash flow has to represent their day-to-day paycheck. And then part of that cash flow has to go towards servicing any debt they might take on to buy the business. And then if they're going to have a down payment and they're putting a down payment to acquire this business, small business is risky, they need to get some kind of ROI on that down payment. So they've got to get a return on that capital too. And on top of that, this seller's discretionary cash flow is based upon the accounting concept of EBITDA, which doesn't include depreciation or amortization, which is how accountants basically describe equipment wearing out. So any kind of new replacement equipment acquisition, what we call capital expenditures, also has to come out of that discretionary cash flow. And on top of it all, any tax bill. So when you start to look at it from the buyer's point of view and you say, okay, because most sellers, if they've got like a $200,000 or $250,000 cash flow, discretionary cash flow, they go, wow, look at this. Who wouldn't love to have a $250,000 income? But it's not going to be their income because all those things I just mentioned have to come out of that 250 grand. And I met a banker who has a great saying. She says, the business someone buys is not the same as the business you sell them. And what she's basically saying is that the seller often has a really great cash flow. If they've been successful and profitable for years, they probably have very little in the way of debts. A lot of the cash flow is free and clear into their pockets. But when that buyer takes over, they're going to get a loan. And so they're going to have that debt service. And then maybe they're going to have to start replacing equipment. That's all got to come out of that cash flow. And that's where the empathy comes in. Because what I often challenge some sellers with who are detached from this is I'll put them through the exercise. I'll say, let's say you're buying this business. What kind of down payment do you likely think the person is going to have? First of all, who is this person? Because sellers will often not even think about that. Who is the prospective customer? So if you're selling, like, for example, a small restaurant or cafe, in all likelihood, the buyer is going to be somebody who is currently an employee in the hospitality industry, an industry known for low wages. Right? So in all likelihood, this person is going to have a very limited down payment unless they're fortunate enough maybe to have some family support or something like that. And so now if you have a limited down payment, you're looking at a larger loan, either from a bank or from the seller, like I mentioned earlier, right? And so when you start to walk a seller through the process and they start to see how this cash flow they're so proud of is going to get parceled out to all these other needs, they begin to realize, oh, wow, if somebody paid the price I was asking for, they'd be working for free for 5 years. And it's easy to understand no one's going to do that. And working with a good professional to help set the expectations is key. And sometimes people will go to a business broker, for example, and there are some really fantastic qualified business brokers who understand that a business has to be priced right in order to sell. And they will do this kind of reality check with sellers. But there are also a lot of business brokers out there who don't do that at all. They just want to get the listing and they'll ask you, what do you want for your business? And they'll put that price on it. And they're not really serving anybody's needs because they lead to this misunderstanding on the part of sellers, the inflated expectations. And then when buyers come along, there's people out there who aren't quite connected to what they're supposed to be doing. And there's a huge turnover in the brokerage industry. People get attracted to what they perceive as big commission rates, and then they don't make it and they end up turning over.
I really appreciate the example. Make everybody buy 2 drinks.
Yeah.
Because understanding our capacity and where we have the opportunity to grow is first and foremost the right thing. I was actually talking to a business owner the other day that said, we're maxed out at our current location and we're going to be getting another one. And we want to do all of these other things. And so here are all the ways I can do that. So they're thinking a little bit differently about expanding, but I can imagine if they didn't, there would be burnout because there's an expectation of more that they can't get in the one space that they have. So they're avoiding some of that right now, but it's going to be interesting to see how that progresses and are they successful? Can they do all of this, the awesomeness with the location of a new building and the rent of a recently redeveloped awesomeness, but knowing that the clientele is right there also, as this is a place where they're working on really making compact 15-minute cities. That's actually a focus to retrofit. Have you heard that phrase before, a 15-minute city?
Yeah, and I've been to a few places before that sort of fit this paradigm. There's a brand new high-speed rapid transit system that they just opened the first leg of in Montreal. And at the end of this line, there's this mega neighborhood block. It's interesting because there's a bunch of densely compact high-rise buildings that are office, apartments, hotel, etc. And there is parking, but it's all hidden underground or in behind. And so it's all laid out very much so that you can easily walk around to all these places and then hop on that new, I think it's called the REM train, to like zip downtown. And so I can see how people are planning these things and with the forethought of making it very walkable. I've seen so many instances of people trying to expand to another location. And of course, you realize, you're doubling your overhead instantly.
At least, depending on what your rent is. And then you've got the on-ramping. Do you have enough staff to do that? How do you train them and onboard them? Are they specialists? Can you get them quickly? Right? Yeah.
I think that there has to be a lot of different thought and experimentation. The other challenge that I sometimes give people who want to do that is I'll say, is there a way to make more money with the current location, even if you serve fewer people? Maybe there's a way to change the product offering or the pricing or something to try to make it more productive. Because obviously it's risky opening that's taking on the double of the overhead.
There are some other factors that have what they have next to them they have been using, and it's likely that will not continue. So their partnerships and the space that they have is actually not big enough to serve what they've been doing, which is interesting. So who knows what will happen there? But to your point, can we be curious? Can we look at something in a different way? And that's actually one of the things I've been gleaning is how can we look at this differently? Not only if we're tired, if we're burnt out, will somebody want to just come in and do this because somebody who's going to be attracted to this is going to be just like us? That's one of the big takeaways that I'm getting. The second one is it sounds like when the reality sets in of of somebody selling a business and the person or people who are buying the business have a really good understanding, it seems like integration would be not only everything you're doing up with potentially a business broker to get to the sale, but even afterwards, there's some good foundational pieces to work from to maximize the correct reality and the correct expectations that have been given from the beginning all the way through.
Let's walk through that a little bit and unpack that because the buyer is not necessarily just like the seller.
I was using your example of the coffee shop most likely in that case, because you're right. It's not always like that.
It depends on how well organized and set up the seller is. So I like to use the example of a roofing business. If there's a roofer that owns a roofing business and has a couple of crews of workers, and that person is doing the quotes every day in the evenings and placing the orders for the material, running everything on a notepad and a cell phone. If anyone goes to look at that business and says, how do you run this business? And the guy says, oh, I'll just explain it to you. It's easy, right? That basically the only person who can buy that business is a roofer that's 20 years younger because they know everything that the person is doing. But if that person has a highly systematized quotation process based on spreadsheets and measurements, and you put in the price of the shingles and labor estimations that have been calculated through observation, and says, here's the tool for quoting. Anyone can fill in these numbers based on measurements you can do from the ground. And here's the process for billing, and here's the process for ordering, and here's the process for scheduling. Now you can sell that business to almost anyone. And so the people who typically are sellers are most often people who are business starters. Okay. And so these are entrepreneurial people. They're people that have a vision, a dream, and then they start their business and maybe things don't quite work out. So they pivot a little bit and they keep amending and adjusting and course correcting and they make it work. And they bet on the dream. What makes them very different from business buyers is that business buyers often look at small business ownership and say, I'd really like to own a business, but I'm not willing to go through this risky endeavor. And typically you're looking at people that may be a little bit older, a little bit experienced. They have some amount of capital saved up because they've had a career of some kind. They're often also people who have maybe some experience in larger organizations. So they're actually familiar with better organized and managed entities that have systems and processes in place. And so what that business buyer is doing is they want to pay money to avoid the risk of doing the startup. And so they are, rather than being entrepreneurs, they are investors first. So they're buying a cash flow just like someone might buy a government bond to obtain the coupon yield. Okay. Now, they're in the world of small business, which means they have to be entrepreneurial to some degree. They're thinking of ideas and ways to change things and how to grow the business, all that kind of thing. But that's a fundamental difference. And the seller is usually very strong operationally. So if you want to think about a large company, it's like having a 400 hitter COO But the CFO and the CMO and the HR person, all these kind of people are a little bit weaker. But the buyer typically is someone maybe who is the strong CFO, CMO, HR person, but operationally they're fearful because maybe they don't quite have a lot of experience with that industry. This is why buyers will typically be worried about things like a training and transition period to help with the changeover because they fear the operational side. They're often more capable at some of the other aspects. And so it's that buyer seller, you can very often get very different kinds of people. And so that entrepreneur who might be really growth obsessed, ambitious, wanting to grow the business, they could sell it to someone who has no aspiration for growth. They might sell it to someone who, in that small cafe kind of example, they might sell it to someone, for example, who's just new to the country and just needs an income. But they just need a sure thing because they've only got a limited amount of money that they brought with them and they can't endure the risk of a startup because that'll really leave them in a bad spot, right? And so this is why you might sometimes see, for example, someone start a small food business or a corner store, and then it gets sold maybe to someone who's new to the country, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, it's all just family members working here now. And so what they're doing is they're just applying a different kind of strategy, and they're saying we want all the money being paid out in wages to stay within our family. So it's the buyer and their outcomes and their desired need or whatever they need out of the business. This is part of what you need to think about when you're putting a business up for sale. And so when I work with sellers, it's one of the things we talk about. Who is going to be the likely buyer? So the bigger, more complex the business, maybe there's a likelihood for a strategic acquirer. Some other business that's in the same or a similar industry might want to buy them to grow geographically, for example. So the business that you were mentioning that wants to add another location, you know, is there another similar business to them in another location that they might want to grow into? Maybe it makes more sense to acquire that other business versus planting a greenfield location, right? Planting a new flag. So that's how big companies typically grow, is they grow through acquisition. This always makes me chuckle. When sellers go online and they Google things about selling their business, what they will find is they will find articles about doing an ESOP, that's an employee stock ownership program, or how private equity is buying businesses, or strategic roll-ups and all this kind of stuff. And the funny thing is the most common kind of buyer is often not mentioned in these articles. And the most common kind of buyer is someone who's a middle-aged person that hates their job and wants to leave their career by buying a business. That is the most common buyer out there, is a person, right? And so that's the one we most often have to prepare for, is a person. And so you ask yourself, what kind of person is this going to be? What kind of money are they likely to have? What are they going to likely have to borrow? And you can sketch out how that buyer is going to look at the business.
I'm your host, Jess Dewell, and we're getting down to business on the Bold Business Podcast. This is where we're tackling the challenges that matter most to you with actionable and achievable advice to get real results that lead to your success. Don't forget, press that bell icon so you never miss a program. And it's time to subscribe as well.
You're listening to the Bold Business Podcast, hosted by Jess Dewell, a nationally recognized strategic growth consultant. She works with business owners and executives to integrate just two elements that guide business through the ups and downs of growth. Number one, know what work is necessary. Number two, do all the work possible. Schedule a complimentary consultation to find out more at reddirection.com.
You're right. Business starters are different than business buyers. And it's interesting. You said something. You said you have to face what you fear. And I find that fascinating because as we're going into this conversation and where I'm sensing it heading into is, if we don't know what we fear, if we don't know what makes us stop, how could we even go through the process to understand who the person might be that would be buying our business on the other side?
The buyer, they ask two primary questions. They say, what is the cash flow? And that's going to determine what they think the business is worth. And then the second question is, will this cash flow continue under my stewardship? And if the answer to that is unknown or no, it doesn't matter what the cash flow is. Like they're not going to do the deal. They have to be certain that they're going to be able to carry on that cash flow. I did a consulting call with someone the other day, and they found this business that provides services to properties, and they get a lot of their business through property managers. So the issue is that even though this company may claim to have 200 customers, 40 of those customers may be coming because they have a relationship with one property manager that's helping condo associations and property owners manage a bunch of buildings. So it represents a customer concentration in a different kind of way, a relationship concentration. And so the current owner has got these really solid relationships with basically half a dozen individual people that are driving all this business. So from a buyer's point of view, if I buy that business, what am I buying? It's basically 6 relationships. And if for whatever reason those relationships don't transfer, I didn't get what I paid for. So my advice to them was, number one, based on the cash flow, here's the valuation, here's what it's worth. But number two, because of the nature of the riskiness of this business, we're looking at, to protect the buyer's interest, the deal has to be largely seller financed. And the seller financing has to be tied to those 6 relationships. And so from the seller's point of view, like they just want a check and they want to cash out and leave. But when you start to understand it from the buyer's point of view and you realize, hey, if these 6 people I do business with don't do business with the new person, that's the risk they're facing, you can start to empathize with that. So if you don't want to be the bank for someone, if you don't want to risk the ultimate purchase price relying upon these 6 relationships transferring, then you have to address that risk well before you put your business up for sale. And so what would that look like? It would look like maybe having employees that deal with customers, right? So that at least when ownership changes, the customers are not dealing with someone new. They're still dealing with familiar employees, right? Or maybe it has to do with a concerted effort to diversify the sources of all the work. We can't rely on 6 relationships. We have to have 20, right? We have to further diversify this. And so it makes you start to think a little bit about how you build and design and grow the business by keeping that buyer in mind.
And I know we've been talking about them where it's going to you're otherwise, right? What happens if the relationships are the key? What's less valuable than that but still has a value is the list of customers. And right, so if you go down, you've got this list of customers, you've got the people who are managing those relationships or a team that's doing something. And then on top of that, you might have the product that still might be connected by the people, but it's still a standalone item, or on top of that, some sort of a platform. And what I notice in businesses is they want the top 2, the product line that's standalone or the platform at the price of they want to sell their list for the price of a platform. And it's interesting because to your point about, can I get what I'm paying for? The answer is absolutely not, unless it's priced right.
So what's interesting in this conversation I had with these
Yeah.
prospective buyers is they actually revealed that through their conversation with the seller told them what another offer he had received looked like. And so this other offer was from somebody in the industry. And the other offer was simply, sure, I'll take over your business and I'll give you $100 for every job I do from the people on your list for the next 5 years. And so if you think about that, basically what that person is saying, I'm completely discounting those relationships. I will only pay you something if it bears fruit and I have my cash register ring. And when I was talking with the buyers, I was like, think about that. This is a person who knows the industry, knows maybe the price sensitivity of the clients, understands the importance of the relationships, and they're not willing to write any kind of check up front. They're entirely saying that they will only pay based on actual performance in the future. There's an accounting term called goodwill, and it's a literal accounting term. It's basically the difference between the tangible assets and the purchase price of the business. But people use the goodwill term to also refer to the feeling in the marketplace people have about a business, right? And so what the seller is expecting in this service business with very few assets is that their past performance indicates a strong amount of goodwill. And what the buyer is doing is they're calling me to get my opinion about whether or not this business is really worth something, that whether they should buy it or not. What the other buyer, the industry buyer, has already indicated is that they don't believe that the business itself has any degree of goodwill. Do you know where the goodwill is? With the individual owner, because he is the person who's friendly with these reference points. And so it's a really great example in understanding sort of the different facets of this. But if you want to sell a business, you have to make sure that the goodwill moves from yourself as an individual to the actual business or brand. Another great example of this difference would be plumbing companies. There's two very different kinds of plumbing companies. There's the kind of plumbing company that goes and acts as a subcontractor for a big condo tower that's being put up. And that company will go and bid and create tender bids for jobs for general contractors. And again, the owner of that company probably knows a lot of the general contractors in the market, and they have this one-on-one relationship, but they're limited because the general contractor understands their business enough to know what their margins should be and what pricing should be. So there's an upper limit on the types of margins you can get in that subcontractor role. And the relationship between the general contractors and the plumbing company owner are probably really important in helping to get those contracts. If you compare that with a residential service plumbing company, and you can just think of someone in your own city, maybe you see their advertisements. At one time, they would have had a big ad in the yellow pages, right? And people know of them because you see the vans around. You don't know who the owner is. You might even remember their phone number from a radio jingle they played at some point. And once every 3 years, something happens in your plumbing at home and you need a plumber, and those are the people you know and you call them. And so in that example, the goodwill is entirely with the brand and the company. That business could be sold every year and the people in the public wouldn't even be aware.
That's actually one of the things that can happen in business design. And so for everybody that's listening to this, take a look at where you're at and what your goals are. Because what I would say to this would be, how can you design to be too deep? For how can you design, as especially if you're the awesome owner that is friendly with everybody and has those relationships, your biggest risk is wanting to take a vacation for 6 weeks and not burn out of your business. Your biggest risk and so design yourself a vacation. Design yourself the ability for other people to have these. Not only do you develop people, not only do you strengthen what's going on within your company, you're adding to this concept of goodwill that you're talking about, David. And that, I think, is an incredible piece, so that there is something else intangible, because the relationships are more with the business than it is with a person. That's true. I get that. In small organizations with account managers, that happens also. To your point about where we started before, we were talking about plumbers with the property managers. Got the property manager. If they go, you're probably going to go. I'm that way with my hairstylist. I go where my hairstylist goes. I don't care what place I'm going to sit in the chair to get my hair cut, kind of thing. And so that's an interesting concept of, so what kind of salon are you building? Are you building one for hairdressers to come to, or are you building one that people are coming because they like your space and the people that you have employed? And that's an interesting concept too.
It's an interesting tangent, but to further build on the hair salon example, the question would be is, who is your real customer group? So we've heard a lot over the last couple of years about labor shortages in certain key areas. And so a business's ability to succeed often has to do with their ability to attract talent, to actually have the capacity to serve customers, right? And so in a business like a hair salon, where there's a strong relationship developed between the end customer and the person who does the hairstyling, the hairstylist is actually a customer group, right? You have to make sure that your offer is competitive vis-a-vis any other place around town.
And what made me think of the hairstylist was the plumber, because I'm thinking the plumber with the brand that is known, who knows who's in the vans? It could be
4 or 5 different companies that have white labeled this for, or white labeled the bigger brand to be able to be part of it. To your point, who is the customer? And there's a twofold customer group: the people when you need them every few years, but also the people who can help make sure that they have their employees taken care of, or they want to be part of something bigger, or they, right, whatever their goals are.
And here's the difference. So you think about a beauty salon where people make an appointment with a particular stylist versus sort of the salon that's inside Walmart. And so those franchise salon like hair places where you get the inexpensive haircuts and maybe you don't even have to make an appointment, you just show up there. Um, the clientele who's drawn to that brand probably doesn't really care who cuts their hair a lot of the time, right? But the person who is really particular and is willing to make the investment to have a particular kind of hairstyle, they want a certain kind of service, they're going to go to the salon where they can make an appointment with that person. It's almost like a law firm. So in a law firm, people will get attached to specific lawyers that are at the law firm. And so what it has evolved over time for law firms to try to make sure that they don't have a constant revolving door of people coming and going is that when people demonstrate a significant contribution and capacity for earnings, et cetera, what do? They make them a partner. And so that whole design of that kind of business is meant to create a sticky factor to retain the best and most capable and highest earning people within that fold. And so I've seen people try to execute these sorts of things in beauty salons where they'll introduce some kind of profit sharing or bonus plan, et cetera, to try to make it more attractive. I don't know anyone who has really succeeded to the same degree as like the law firm example, just because people are motivated by different things.
What are some of the self-reflections that you've done over the year, or exercises that you've done to really get to know yourself to keep you aligned to your mission and purpose?
I have a walking routine every morning. I get up early and I go for a walk with a cup of coffee, and I usually listen to audiobooks or a podcast. And that soundtrack in my head usually just creates the space for me to do some deep thinking, create some ideas. One of the questions that, because I'm giving advice to people and helping people to negotiate things, is I will just ask, if something goes wrong with this, what will it likely have been that was the problem? It's almost like you're trying to put yourself in the future in a point of reflection. It forces you to think about how something might play out for a person in their business deal. And it helps you to identify what the weak points are likely to be. And once you have a greater awareness of what the weak points are likely to be, it can help to inform your strategy or your course of action a little bit.
David, what makes it bold? What makes it bold to take the time to do this thought work to really understand exactly what we have as a business owner before we ever might even consider selling a business?
I don't think it makes it bold. I think it makes it practical and pragmatic. And if you are running a business, then your day to day is filled with practical. The reason people don't do it is because they don't want to do it, because they probably have this niggling voice in the back of their head saying that there's problems. And if they sit down and go through the exercise of really thinking about it through the eyes of a buyer, then they know that they're going to have their eyes opened or have to recognize the fact that there's a bunch of other things that need to be worked on. And I think that's what people are afraid of, is that it's going to be a lot of work to fix things. And if business were easy, everybody would do it. Like the reality is that, yeah, business is hard. There's all kinds of work that has to be done. When I started to actually, when I was a business broker and I started to be a little bit more proactive and I started to do the things that led to the program I created, the build a business that people want to buy, a funny thing started to happen. When people put a little bit of effort into better organization and getting processes in place, et cetera, some of them then told me that they didn't want to sell their business anymore because their business became more pleasant to own and run. And I already mentioned earlier that you don't sell a business to cash out. The real meat in business owner is in owning it and operating it and collecting that cash flow every year. And so if you can grow a business in a way that is going to be a pleasant business to own and it's going to be easier to operate, it's overall going to be more lucrative for you over the long haul. And the ultimate creme de la creme exit from a small business is when you exit, meaning you leave the door, but you remain the owner. Because if other people can make it go and you can still collect the cash flow with that, that's worth far more than any kind of exit, because you still get to keep the good part while you've handed off the work part. That's probably the toughest one to execute. There's no question.
Every single time I have a conversation, I take away something that I want to share with 25 people. I know when you're listening to this podcast, you're also listening for that and will have something that you want to share. In the comments, I would like for you to engage with us. What is that thing that you want to tell 25 people from this program? Here's why it's important. It's important because, yeah, there are going to be how-tos. Yes, there are going to be steps. Yes, you're going to be like, oh, I wish I wrote that down. I wish I wasn't doing this and I could actually take action on that right now. But guess what? You're not. So engage right now, because that one thing you want to share with others will be the thing that you can figure out how to incorporate in your business, in your workflow, in your style tomorrow.
Wow! Jess hosts the Bold Business Podcast to provide insights for building a resilient, profitable business by deeply understanding your growth strategy, ensuring market relevance, and your company's future. It is bold to deeply understand your growth strategy with your host, Jess Dewell. Get more information about how to drive solutions and reset your growth mindset at reddirection.com. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to our post-production team at The Scott Treatment.